Welcome, everyone. This is part of the CBDNA Oral History Project. My name is Courtney Snyder. I'm the Associate Director of Bands at the University of Michigan, and I really have the honor today to interview a mentor, colleague, and friend, and former Director of Bands at the University of Michigan, and also former President of CBDNA from 2001 to 2003, Professor Michael Haithcock. As I mentioned, Michael Haithcock was the Director of Bands here at Michigan. He's now the Arthur Thurnau Emeritus Professor of Music. He served as Director of Bands at Michigan for 22 years, starting in 2001. Coincidentally, in 2001 is when he also started being president of CBDNA. So he had a busy 2 years of his life as he began his tenure here and served as president. We want to dig into the details of his presidency and leadership, but also want to talk about the experience of the arc of CBDNA over his lifetime here and when he started. If you haven't watched the video of Michael interviewing David Whitwell, I encourage you to do so. It was recorded back in February of 2023. And in that, he talks about David Whitwell's presidency, which was right at the 70s and 80s. And this is actually when Michael started attending CBDNA conferences. So I thought we could start there. Sure. Talk about that first experience that you had.
Well, I graduated from East Carolina in 1976, and I went to Baylor to study with Dick Floyd. My goal was to replace my high school band director when he retired. And I remember, going into my studies at Baylor and hearing that the Baylor Wind Ensemble was going to play at the National CBDNA Convention in College Park, Maryland, at the University of Maryland in this winter of 1977. And I was like, well, what's CBDNA? So Dick explained it to me and what an honor it was for the ensemble to be invited. And there was a great deal of excitement about that. And then they found out that they had been chosen to present the premiere of the CBDNA commission for that biennium by Ernst Krenek. And, we went to Maryland to play our concert. And the night before, we got to hear the Eastman Wind Ensemble play their concert. And I heard the premiere of Schwantner, Mountains Rising Nowhere. I saw Fred Fennell conduct the Krenek Three Merry Marches. And La Fiesta Mexicana ended the program, but the only recordings at that time that you could purchase of wind groups was either the Netherlands Wind Ensemble or the Eastman Wind Ensemble. So it was like this rich experience to not only hear the premiere of the Schwantner, which has become one of the cornerstones of our repertoire, but just to experience hearing that group live. As somebody who had started to collect their recordings, it was really a tremendous experience, and it opened my eyes right away to the world of collegiate bands and collegiate ensembles, as well as getting to know some of the personalities that were in leadership at that point.
So who were some of those leaders? Obviously, Frederick Fennell, you already knew who he was through his history at Eastman, but who were some of the leaders of CBDNA at that time?
Well, David Whitwell, as you mentioned in his previous commentary about the interview I did with him, was the president. And one of the important things about that interview that I hope people will grasp is just how precarious the future of CBDNA was when David took over as president in 1975. They were virtually bankrupt. The organization was in disarray. And, I was just beginning to learn what a profound scholar David Whitwell was. So meeting him, Bob Reynolds was chairman of the commissioning committee, so he came to all the rehearsals with Krenek. Don Hunsberger, who I had barely heard of, was now the conductor at Eastman, and obviously conducted most of the concert that I heard. I was made aware of Frank Battisti, who was president soon thereafter. So the names of people who were president in the late 70s, early 80s were the people that I realized were the leaders of the profession at that point, and I was really engaged in trying to find out more about the organization and what their plans for the organization were, still thinking I'd be a high school band director before too long.
When did it change that you weren't going to be a high school band director?
Well, a couple of weeks before I graduated with my master's degree at Baylor, the dean called me in and said, we're going to create a new position as assistant director of bands here at Baylor. Would you do it for 1 year? I'll give you a double assistantship. And I debated it for a week and finally decided to do it because it was 1 year. And then 1 year turned into 4, and then Mr. Floyd left, and they made me director of bands, and I was there until I came here.
So, yeah, it's pretty amazing history. In that time frame, obviously with that first experience of CBDNA, what were the next few years like now that you're obviously invested as a college band director?
Yeah.
What was it about CBDNA that made you want to invest your time there?
Well, I think that initial experience in 1977 was like, a flash of light. Like, this is what's possible. I didn't know these composers. I just played whatever was put in front of me in high school and in college. So I was lucky that I played a lot of Persichetti and Husa and those kind of things, Granger, but I had no idea really what was going on in the composition world. So that was very exciting, and the combination of the old guard of Krennic versus the new guard of Schwantner was very appealing to me. So I started really digging into composers. And I didn't go to the 1979 CBDNA conference, and I was now a faculty member at Baylor because our daughter had just been born, so I did what I thought was more important.
I think your wife would appreciate that.
Yeah. And then in 1981, the conference was here in Ann Arbor. So I came to Ann Arbor for that conference, experienced Hill Auditorium, heard the University of Michigan Symphony Band for the first time in Ann Arbor. I'd heard them on tour in Texas before that. And Gunther Schuller was walking around, William Kraft was here, there were many other composers. Heard, another tremendous set of concerts. And I think the sessions, although I can't remember specifically the details of the sessions, I think the sessions proved to me that there was a lot going on outside the rehearsal room that I should become aware of and be interested in. And I do remember that Gunther Schuller gave an address at the closing banquet that was very pointed about the quality of music that wind groups should be playing and should be commissioning, and that resonated very well. And that was also the conference in which WASB sort of got galvanized and came to life. There'd been a lot of work by Tim Rainish and others in Europe, and then Frank Battisti was president of CBDNA during that conference. And there was a lot of discussion about the value of WASB, and then the first big WASB conference was held that next summer. So it was just really exciting to be part of the milieu of activities, which were very much looking forward. And you have to remember that those years I'm talking about, from 77 to 81, for example, came out of the previous, like late 60s, early 70s, when CBDNA was talking more about standardized instrumentation, what to do with athletic problems. And there was a breakout conference that happened for several years called the Wind Ensemble Conference. And there was sort of this divide. And the Wind Ensemble Conference, I think, according to David Whitwell, just proved not to be financially sustainable. But those folks sort of took over the leadership in many ways of CBDNA. So it sort of, in a way, modernized what CBDNA was thinking about. And I just found that to be very, very compelling.
So you're now director of bands at Baylor, and how was it that you came into leadership at the Southwest Division?
I think I was just too stupid to say, no, I won't do that. I was at Baylor, and I went to the 83 convention and so forth, and I kept, going. I went to the regional conferences, and I don't remember the details. I just remember somebody asking me if I would be willing to, be an officer. And I said, okay, I'll do it, because I believed in the organization. And I was really invested in what I was learning. It wasn't just that I went for this, whatever, social aspect of it. I was really interested in learning. And I really wanted to try to make a difference in what other people could learn by serving and daydreaming about what would be possible at regional conferences and all that sort of thing. So, it's a long trail of service. You're regional vice president, regional president-elect, and then regional president. And during the time you're regional president, you're on the national board, and then that led to, my being elected to national office. But I think there was a really warm group of people, Jerry Junkin at UT, Bill Wakefield at Oklahoma, Alan McMurray at Colorado, Joe Missile at Oklahoma State, and Louis Ferrari at Southwestern University in Georgetown, and there's so many names, I'm just naming a few. But everyone was kind of pulling the same direction. And it wasn't so much like you have to do something this way, but there was a sort of a common understanding of what we wanted the Southwest Division to represent. So that made it easy to kind of put your shoulder to the wheel. And it wasn't just one person way out in front and everybody else standing back like this. It was really a team approach. And, the way it played out, there was an awful lot of communication within the division about goals and expectations. And so when I had the chance to host the conference, regional conference in 1994, where I think Joe was the divisional president, Baylor had just opened the new music building. So we had some funds to make this a splash, and we made a big deal. We brought in a lot of composers. We had some scholars who came, and we had a really large attendance for a regional conference. And I was really proud of what we were able to offer. We had people come from other divisions because of the quality of the programming, and that made all the work worthwhile. And I think it was sort of established a tone of not only artistic pursuit, but scholarly and professional pursuit for people.
So when you came into a leadership position within the Southwest Division, were you thinking about the national board at that time, or you were just like, no, thinking about the first step here?
I'm not that smart. I just agreed to serve, and I don't think I really looked up and realized that it was going to be a 14-year slog. Again, I said earlier I was probably too stupid to say no, but I didn't aspire to be president. I was willing to be president when it came up, but I didn't take that opportunity with that goal in mind. It was just, okay, somebody thinks I can help, I'm going to help, because it was important. It had been a decade or more of this is really important, and I wanted to pay my professional dues, if you will. And if I back up a step, Courtney, once we came back from the conference in Maryland, Dick was appointed as Secretary-Treasurer. And so over the next few years, I had a lot of conversations with him about what needed to be done, how things were going, how people my age felt about things. And then, he was on the board. And I mentioned earlier the organization was almost bankrupt. I'll never forget the day he called me into his office, and I went in, and there were these 3 shoe boxes sitting on his desk. And he looks down and he says, "This is what I've received from the past Secretary-Treasurer of CBDNA. This is the sum total of records for the organization." 3 shoe boxes full of index cards with people's names and so forth on it. So, that's when you think about that, and you think about, where things are today. Of course, there's been so much that's been made possible by the internet and digitalization and all that, but it's just hysterical to me to look back, what's now 47 years, to those moments, and look at the trajectory of both the structural growth, but the artistic developments and scholarly developments of the organization as well.
So once you finished your tenure within the Southwest Division, then you're moving into the national. What was your first role in there? And then maybe what were some of the things that were happening at CBDNA at that time?
Yeah, well, as has been the protocol, if you are president of a division, you are eligible to be, on the president. So then if you stand for election and you get elected, you have this, vice president, president-elect, president, past, immediate past president, very past president cycle. And at that point, I think I had learned enough about the organization. I had learned enough about myself that I was willing to sacrifice the really extensive amount of time it takes to be in those leadership roles. And I continue to feel compelled by what I was gaining and learning from the experiences. And I wanted to make sure that other people who were younger coming in, I was 40 in 1994 when I was, taking over as president of the Southwest Division. So it was not until a few years later where my cycle of being president of the division, turned into, would you stand for national election? And I think one of the things that I hope is not lost on people in the diversity, equity, and inclusion that we strive for and work with now is that there was an African American president of CBDNA in 1983, William P. Foster from Florida A&M. There were members of the boards that I served with who were of color and women, and why they didn't stand for election, I can't answer, because a lot of people made personal decisions that they weren't willing to do that. But Tom Duffy and Mike Moss and Mallory Thompson and others started the Gender and Ethnicity Task Force, which led to, sort of the initial groundbreaking, if you will, of concern about these topics that have developed over time. And I think, the organization has made significant progress, still has a long way to go, as do many organizations. But I was very, pleased with those efforts. And then as I became more involved in the national leadership, did everything I could to, support and expand those. And over these years at Michigan, it's been great to be able to offer the Mike Moss diversity grants for conducting workshops. And so many people have donated that. And, I just think it's what we should be doing and what we need to do ever more. But you have to start someplace. Mm-hmm. And I think those initial efforts were the right call at the right time. And as Martin Luther King said famously, the arc of justice bends slowly. And I think it's been in fits and starts of development, but I think that was one of the things I'm most proud of. Another thing that I think really happened during those years, I think I've told you this before, but I went to the 1980 CBDNA Conducting Symposium in Greeley, Colorado, hosted by Eugene Corporana. And that summer, that was the one and only conducting workshop available to young wind conductors. Well, now we have as many as there are Starbucks. They just kind of blossomed and took off. And CBDNA sponsored one at the University of Colorado after Eugene left for years, and until it was no longer necessary to seed that. Right. And I think it's really critical to look back at from current conditions back at the way in which CBDNA seeded things. Commissioning is another example. I remember at Baylor, 4 or 5 of us got together and commissioned Michael Tippett. 4 or 5 of us got together and commissioned John Harbison to write 3 City Blocks. And then one day at a business meeting at the conference in Atlanta in 1997, that might not be the right year, it might, but Tom Duffy stood up and said, "Hey, we need more money so we can commission John Harbison to write a ballet for the Pilobolus Ballet Company." So it would have been early in that, because that Olympic Dances by Harbison with the ballet company was premiered in 1997 at the University of Georgia conference. And so people said, "Okay, I'll buy share. What's the share?" And that was kind of the beginning of, oh, wait a minute, we can build consortiums. Mm-hmm. And the orchestras weren't doing it. Now the orchestras are doing what we were doing. So we no longer have a biannual CBDNA commission, because we don't need to. I mean, everybody and his brother is involved in one or more consortiums for the most part at a wide range of levels.
And that's really great to the composers as well, because now they're getting that many people buying in, means that many people are getting exposed to this composer's work, and that composer has even more opportunities to work with a variety of different ensembles and people.
And when you factor the consortium piece of bringing a piece of music to life with the diversity, equity, inclusion, with an ever-increasing number of female composers and a number of folks of color, then that mechanism for the consortiums and exposing those voices to a wide array of groups, to me, has emerged meaning with the, what started out as 2 separate entities, with the diversity and ethnic task force and the commission has come together, and also with the conducting symposiums, the support of that. There's the weaving together of things, not rather than just be siloed I think it's been something that's been very impressive.
It is a long journey to kind of move your way up through the divisions into the national. What are some of the positive takeaways you've had from being able to spend that much time invested in leadership?
Well, I think if I look back over the arc, and it's been, you said it's been 20 years since I've been president, but then I spent 4 years as immediate past president. If I look back over that arc of time, I think getting to know people in the organization at multiple levels. For example, I think the conference that Craig hosted with me in 2003 at Minnesota was the first time we split into multiple sessions during any times. So before that, there had been, there'd be this talk, and then there'd be that, and then there'd be some athletic stuff, and then you could see who was interested by who did and didn't come. And so there was this sort of, again, the siloing or separation, and I think by listening to people talk about their concerns for the organization, there's people who say, well, CBDNA hasn't helped me get another job. Well, that's not CBDNA's role. But, I didn't feel like my concerns for doing a better job at my school were being addressed. Well, when you listen up and down the roster of people who are involved in CBDNA and really try to process what you're hearing, I feel like I made a tremendous number of friends in that process, but also I think it helped to shape what I wanted to do when it was actually my call in terms of leadership. And I've tried post-presidency to not offer advice to anybody unless they ask, but also be open to being asked and also be open to hearing from people who aren't officers who want counsel and advice. I think that's the most important personal benefit was the depth of relationships, the depth of information about the people who actually do the work. CBDNA is a huge umbrella. And what happens at Alma College is very different than what happens here at the University of Michigan. And what happens at, a school which is a land grant institution that has a music service department is very different than what happens at the University of Southern California. So kind of trying to put everybody in the same lump, which I think had happened pre the Wind Ensemble Conference days, or maybe after the Wind Ensemble Conference days folded and turned into those folks leading CBDNA, there was an assumption that everybody was pushing for the same things. And I think opening the umbrella up and saying, okay, if you're working with a college band, period, you fit under this umbrella, how can we serve you? And I think there was a collection of people who had that mindset during the time that I was on the national board that really made it extremely rewarding. You're not going to please everybody. That's
we know that as a band director.
Yeah, well, if you get 3 people in a room, you're not going to please everybody. But, being open to hearing what people are displeased about and then seeing what could be corrected and worked. And look at the athletics band. The athletic band thing now has their own kind of conference, and I feel those people are much more invested in the regular national conferences because of what they have. And, one of the funny things as being president was transitioning into the age of the internet. Because we were spending $12,000 a year to print the CBDNA report a few times a year and mail it out. And it was like, well, now we have these computer things and we have the internet and we can send these out as PDFs. And there was some resistance on the board. But with $12,000 a year, there was a lot of other things we could do. And so a lot of the things that, were positive, like the CBDNA ASCAP Frederick Fennell Award, were possible with money we saved simply by transitioning from the old school, we're going to mail it to you, and we're going to deliver it in your email.
And that started in your presidency, at the end of your presidency?
During my presidency, okay. Yeah. Because I remember Dick was Secretary-Treasurer for, many years. And he was great. But a lot of the board meeting discussion would be, hey, can we afford this? And he would look at the finances and say, well, I think so. And we'd get a spreadsheet of where the money had come from and where it might be going, but there was never an allocated budget. So I really pushed for a deliberation of how are we going to use these resources, and that's when the $12,000 to print and mail came up, and we had a collective discussion. It wasn't easy, that we needed to make changes, and we actually created a budget model then that we were able to allocate more money to the regions for conferences. Just a lot of things that, because we were not looking at it as daddy may I, but can we do this based on sound physical responsibility way of thinking through organizational matters, and I think it made a big difference.
I mean, it fascinates me how we initially, even the Mike Moss grants, started with just a handful, and now we give out many each year.
Right.
That's a huge help to the education of a lot of future college band directors.
Absolutely.
And that's due to astute use of finances,
Yeah.
which is an important part of the job. Who else was leading CBDNA at the time that you came into the national board? So who were the people that you were working with?
So when I finished up my time as division, I was asked by Alan McMurray, who was going to be president for the 97-99 cycle, if I would be the commissioning chairman. And I'd mentioned earlier that Tom had this idea of consortium, but he also had an idea of, let's survey the membership and let's see what the membership wants in a commission. So there was a really big push to do collaborative projects, and that led to the ballet. Other projects were concertos for fill in the blank instrument, and then there was a thing about the opera. So I, as chairman of the commissioning committee, initiated, could we do an opera, and that developed into Bandana, and that's only part of your question. We can come back to that, but Alan was president, and then Eugene Corporon was president-elect, and then I was elected to be the vice president, which set that succession up, and then Gary Hill had taken over as the Southwest Division president. So there was this line of people, that were queued up, I think, who had a lot of conversations about similar interest in the ways that I've been describing our interest in expanding the umbrella and bringing more people into the fold. And one of the things we talked about quite a bit was, why do we have so few people at national conferences? I mean, if we have 1,500 members, why do we only get 300 or 400? And part of it's dates, part of it's location, part of it's expense, part of it's personal expense versus budget expense. But those were all the things that we grappled with, trying to make this something for everybody and something that would be affordable for everybody.
So as you come into being president, one of those responsibilities is hosting a conference, right? So you talked about that briefly. This was with Creek Kirchhoff at Minnesota.
Right.
You mentioned about the sort of multiple sessions occurring. What were some of the other goals that you had for that particular conference?
Well, I think anybody who's looking to project a conference has to have somebody who is a collaborative partner. And there were several things in several places in play, if you will, and I visited those, and it just proved that either this is not going to work logistically, or it's not going to work because of expense. And then Craig was very magnanimous, and they had the facilities, and the hotel was across the bridge, and it just worked. Mm-hmm. So it was in the middle of the country. It was very affordable. I actually did a survey. I mean, I sat at my computer. I did this twice. On this occasion, I emailed everybody on the roster of CBDNA in that booklet, that directory, mm-hmm. personally. I would do 4 and 5 names at a time, just go through the list. And I pitched 4 different sets of dates. And the date that we had the conference that year was the last weekend in March, because that was by far the most preferred dates. I don't remember the other dates, but I remember asking people to reply, gauging these 4 sets of dates with 1 through 4, with 1 being the preference. And it was like the least preferred time was the time that we had been having it.
Oh, interesting.
Interesting, yes, because it was right on the heels of a lot of state conferences.
Right.
It was right on the ABA was coming up for those people involved in ABA. And of course, there was some pushback. Well, it's going to be the final 4. Well, that's only 4 people. But, people couldn't make plans, and I understand all that. But we tried it for a few years, and the attendance went up. And then, the Carnegie Hall Conference 2005, we had to go with what Carnegie Hall could do, and it kind of went back the other way. But it was interesting to actually check in with people. That was, part of the reason I did that was not because I had an agenda, but because it was part of that overarching question. If we have 1,500 members, why do we only get 300 or 400 at the conference? So that was a goal. You get to the conference, it's your last breath as president. So I wanted it to kind of be, a summation of the things that the collective board had discussed and believed in. We had the National Intercollegiate Band, and I don't remember how many we'd had before, but that was a very, very important thing. And we had Giancarlo Guerra, who's gone on to be, a very big music director in the orchestral world, who was a student of mine at Baylor, who was the assistant conductor in Minnesota. He conducted that group, and, there were people who were upset that he wasn't a band director, and, he did some repertoire, like he did Variations on a Medieval Tune, and there were people who felt, well, he didn't do it the traditional way. He just interpreted the music. So you got the pros and cons, but that was a big deal for a lot of those students. We had some scholars who were there. Bastian Blomert, the harmony music expert from Europe, came and did several presentations, and they were very insightful. And I don't remember all the details, but there was a lot of things for a wide variety of people. And I don't remember the numbers, but it felt like the attendance was more robust than it had been in some of the previous conferences.
You had mentioned a little bit about the whole advice component of, people willing to give advice, sometimes unsolicited. When you became president, what were some of those important tidbits of advice that you received from past presidents?
I think the most important thing, advice-wise, that I got was from Frederick Fennell, who I don't think had ever been president, but he told me to be aware of the alphabet soup of the band world. And I was like, okay, Fred, what does that mean? And he was like, there's CBDNA, there's ASB, DA, there's NBA, there's ABA, there's all these organizations. And he said, everybody wants to claim hierarchy. And he said that's really not important. What's really important is who is in your organization and who do they serve. And so the College Band Directors National Association, by definition, is a unique set. Because you can be in the other alphabets without really belonging to the college band, So I think his mission, his advice was to try to make this distinctive to the people who fit under the umbrella. And he also, part of that was some of these organizations he didn't feel were about music. And he felt it was really important for CBDNA to continue to be about the music. Whether or not people in other organizations agree with that, that was his take on it, and I found that to be very helpful. There were people who wanted me to champion a certain idea that was their pet idea or project. There were certain people who, wanted me to focus on a composer that they adored, that they felt was underrepresented by CBDNA. And underrepresented, I don't mean in any diversity sense, just not given their due. And so you have to kind of wade through all that and, try to make independent decisions. But I think for the most part, people who offered advice had really good intentions. There's only so much you can do because you take over, and then there's regional conferences that are planned by other people, and then you're having board meetings once or twice a year, And then before you know it, you have a conference that you're responsible for, which is your sort of exclamation point of leadership. So I think, if I look back on it, the conference is really sort of the icing on the cake. But the most important stuff is what happens along the way to move the organization forward, whether that actually bears fruit at the conference or whether it bears fruit over the long term. Right. So one of the things that we tried to do, Alan had initiated during his leadership a Young Composer Award, which we were offering $5,000, and it was a certain, young composer for young band. Mm-hmm. And I think this piece, Zion's Walls by Greg Danner, was the first one to win that. And that's a good piece, and it's gotten a lot of play. So I wanted to initiate an award that would, I mentioned earlier, that would honor Thurnau, who had passed away during the time that I was president, because of his tremendous legacy. Right. And so I had gotten to know Fran Richards, who is the president of ASCAP, in the bandana process. And so she agreed to, basically house the competition for the, Frederick Thurnau Prize, and CBDNA sponsored the money. So we matched the Young Composer Award with a $5,000 grant to the recipient, and we sent several people every 2 years to be on the jury, and they had several people from ASCAP, the composers, who would then review the scores. And I thought that was really an important connection, because it put us at the forefront of something that's extremely important to composers, whether it's ASCAP or BMI. They're representatives in terms of, the copyright issues and all the things that are part of the composer's world. To make that connection and to have somebody like Fran, who's such an advocate, I felt that was a really strong connection, and one that Thurnau would have been extremely honored by, because he did so much to bring not only great interpretations of masterworks, but advance the medium, if you will.
Absolutely. That award is worth more money now, is it not?
Yes, I'm not really sure how much it's worth now, but I hope it's worth more than $5,000. But 20 years ago, $5,000 was what it was.
So you've mentioned the bandana a few times, and this was before you were president. So you were on the commissioning. Yeah.
So at the end of the biennium that ended with the Harbison Olympic Dances premiere, Tom Duffy had been chair of commissioning for a while, and Alan asked me to be chair of commissioning. So a few months later, I was elected to be vice president, which means you're, on the chart, yeah. And I contacted him and said, I think you should name somebody else. And he said, no, I want you to keep this up. And he said, I think, perhaps one of the things that we need to rethink is, what is the vice president of CBDNA's portfolio, other than being, in waiting? And I know, this is an important issue to you, so go for it. So, I went back to the survey, and those things that were at the top of the list, well, we weren't going to probably get a cello concerto for Yo-Yo Ma. That was, something like that was at the top of the list, or somebody's favorite trumpet player. We didn't think that was worth chasing. So, I think other than the ballet, which had been achieved, there was a notion of an opera in the way in which Threepenny Opera or the Kirke, Good Soldier Swike, had become, fabric of the repertoire. So, if you look at the people who are writing for the Met, they may have been out of our price league. Yes. So this was about the time that John Carigliano was, finishing up Ghost of Versailles and, that sort of thing. Harbison had written The Great Gatsby, and, it just didn't seem practical. But there was this composer who had written 2 operas, one of which was called The Shining Brow, which had gotten really good reviews, and his name was Darren Hagen. So I started a conversation with Darren about the potential of writing an opera. I explained what we wanted, and we talked about terms, and he sent me a bunch of his scores and recordings, and the board convened in Austin because Alan was going to be in Austin for some other reason, and
That's also where the conference was going to be.
yes,
The
yes,
coincidence?
yes. That must have been why he was there. Now that she mentioned it, yeah. And Eugene was in North Texas. He drove down. I was at Baylor. So, we poured through these scores and we listened to a lot of the Shining Brow and thought, well, these terms, which was $100,000, was workable, and let's see what we can do. And CBDNA put in 20 of the 100. So we had that as a platform. So there was a contract process that was signed, and to help raise the money, Darren agreed to make the overture from Bandana a full piece for band. He agreed to make a section of the opera in the first act called Wedding Dances, a separate piece for band. He agreed to make a couple of arias accompanied by the group in the pit, standalone things, and all those things came to fruition. So there was a scale of what you could contribute. I think $10,000 was you had the right to do up to 4 performances at your school. Mm-hmm. 1 or 2 schools did that. The lowest was $500, and that was you got the two band pieces. Yeah. And a lot of people did that. And again, I sat at my computer. I emailed everybody in the directory until we got the money. And it was a lot of Sunday afternoons and late night emails, but there was no other way to do it. There wasn't really a way to go on the website, and I don't even know if the website was in existence in 1997. So it was kind of like if you're going to do it, and I didn't want to send out a letter.
Like a blanket letter?
Yeah, like an all-call letter. Here's what you can do, because
they don't get paid attention to.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, junk mail from your state senator or whatever, So I felt at least, with the emails, there would be a lot of deletes, but people would respond. Some people responded right away with, I can do this, or I'm sorry, this is a great project, I don't have the funds. But again, it was relational in a way. And so, initially the project was going to be premiered by the Austin Lyric Opera and take place during the conference in February of 1999. And for various artistic reasons that happened between the composer and the director of that company, that fell apart. So University of Texas at Austin said, we'll do it.
And then you conducted it.
Well, I wound up conducting it against my will, because Jerry couldn't only be in so many places at one time. And there was no opera conductor at UT per se. They would finagle it from one opera production to the next. So Alan thought it was important that whoever led the opera, was a band director. So I drove to Austin after finishing teaching at Baylor at 12:30 every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or most every Monday, Wednesday, Friday for 6 weeks, and spent the last few weekends before the conference doing sitz probes and run-throughs and all that sort of stuff. And it was an amazing experience. When you're in the middle of a project like that, as you like to say, you just do what's in front of you. So I just did what did in front of me, and my family was, enormously supportive. And then immediately when you do something like that, everyone starts making judgments.
Of course.
So it was good, it was bad. How dare he use bandana as the title bandana was a slap at the band world. Well, it was actually a resetting of the Otello story.
Right, which actually done with the bandana.
Yeah, so, people make judgments, and they did the same thing at Carnegie Hall with the marching band in the John Carigliano Symphony. People were like, oh, he's, giving the,
Pandering of sorts.
Yeah, and I guess, everybody has their opinion, and it's fine, but there was none of that. And there was also a controversy because in the end, when Desmona is singing her death song, off stage were these 3 violins who had been part of the mariachi group earlier, playing this sort of hollow chorale, which was ghostly. Well, people got all worked up about that because there was supposed to be no strings. Well, there was a double bass in the pit, but it just felt then and it feels now that all that was silly. I think the bigger issue with the piece is it's really hard, and the male roles particularly are very, very difficult. We even had to bring in 2 professionals to make it work. One was on the faculty at UT, and another was, on the faculty at UNLV. Darren does not feel that way, that he doesn't feel they're that hard, but whether they are now or not, I don't know, but 20 years ago, they were very hard, and there weren't students at UT that were up to it. And so it all worked out, but I think, he was very connected to the amazing poet Paul Muldoon, right. And so the libretto is in complete rhyme, and there's issues with that because it doesn't necessarily to everyone feel authentic, because people who are coming across the border don't speak in rhyme. But you have to suspend that lack of authenticity to buy into the thing. And then there's other issues with even at a school like Michigan, people say, well, that'd be fun to do sometime, but we need to do La Boheme. Our students need to do La Boheme. Our students need to do that. And I don't think in the process of commissioning and working on the project, there was a great deal of long-term thinking about what a big opera school, even like Indiana, what would that mean for them? Would they be willing to do it?
Logistical.
Yeah. It was just like, here's an opportunity to create something. Let's see where this goes. I mean, if I go back to the Krennic Commission, Krennic was, world-renowned in 1977. He was, even at times more popular in Germany than Hindemith in the 20s and 30s. And even though that star had faded somewhat by 1977, it was important to get a piece by this person who had been a major factor in the 20th century. No one does the piece now,
right.
Because the language of the 12-tone, even though it was not serial in a way, it was in a way, very pictorial of the 5 dream sequences. People just don't do that piece anymore. So I remember hearing in 1981 here at the conference, the big CBDNA commission was by Mario Davidovsky, who was an electronic music composer who had won the Pulitzer Prize and was a major teacher at Columbia, New York. The piece kind of, I don't know that it had got more than a handful of performances thereafter. So commissioning is like a scratch-off ticket. At the lottery, you may win big, you may win a little, you may not win at all. And I don't regret. Yeah, I don't regret spending the time. I don't regret us as a group of stakeholders spending the money. And I think there's some value to those subset pieces as well as the large opera. And it's, as we sit here and talk, it's very close to the 25th anniversary of that in 2024. And I hope there will be some scholarly review and, long-term thinking about the impact of the commissioning process, which, was kind of the second of these big consortium projects, again, that have taken off.
So maybe as we get towards the end of our interview here, as you're thinking about things moving forward, granted you get to do that now, being retired, but you get to kind of look at it from a different perspective now, right? What are things that you're excited for CBDNA within the upcoming future? I mean, there's a lot changing in our world.
Yeah. Well, I think, I went to the conference this year at the University of Georgia, and I felt like the playing was across the board at a very high level. I felt like the sessions were interesting. A lot of them, lacked relevance to me at this point in my career, but they were interesting to the people who were in attendance, and that's really all that matters. I think that this sort of larger umbrella idea that I've mentioned several times is really the key to the future, and not trying to make everybody feel that they have to do it a particular way, whether that's the way you did it where you went to school or the way that the people in your division do things. What is it that you want the organization to be? I think the recent changes in the way the board is elected is a huge step forward, and we have to, for time in memoriam, pay homage to Mark Speed and the board that led us through the pandemic, because it would have been easy for the whole thing to fold again. And I think, the leadership has just been incredible. I don't know that CBDNA is the place for people to try to earn tenure. I hear a lot of people say, well, I need to present or I need to play at TBNA so CBDNA so I can earn tenure. I think that's sort of like along the lines of, I hope CBDNA can help me find another job. There's some value in those experiences, but those should be, the final step, maybe not, banking on that entirely. So being rational about what the organization is and what it can do, both in terms of how we build a diverse pool of conductors, a diverse pool of composers, how we represent various kinds of cultures on the concert stage, how we prepare people to go out and teach in an ever-changing educational environment. I think those are the real important issues. And who knows when athletics goes to completely streaming, pay-per-view, who knows what's going to happen to basketball bands and college marching bands in the next 25, 30 years. There's so many unknowns, but I think the way forward in any organization is to have people who are committed to serve in the organization, not having the organization serve them. And one of my frustrations as president, and I've heard this from other presidents, is you ask people to take on a task, membership of a committee or lead a committee, zip, nothing happens. They say yes, but then it's very difficult to galvanize the effort and move it forward. So if you're watching this interview and you want to serve, be committed to serving. And I think that's a really crucial thing. We need people who are willing to serve and serve at a very basic level of all the things that make the gears of the organization turn forward. And then those people generally, I think, emerge into leadership positions.
Mm-hmm. And develop along the way, hopefully, a vision for a positive vision for the future.
Right.
Well, if there's anything else that you would like to contribute here, or questions I didn't ask?
Oh, I think you've been very thorough. I would just like to end by saying that CBDNA has been an extremely beneficial and important part of my arc of 47 years, and I intend to continue to be present at conferences because I'm interested in where the field is going, and I'm interested in the people who are in the field. And I hope that that the field will continue to expand in all the ways that we've discussed and continue to be forward-thinking, not necessarily looking backwards. Because I think the real strides that I've been privileged to be part of have not been about any one individual, but have been about the collective wisdom of the people who were trying to serve the organization. And that is, to me, what has been most meaningful about CBDNA.
Well, and that's what's so great about any organization, is being able to bring people together to achieve more. Right. It's even as an ensemble, we get to do that with making music as well. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a real joy to talk with you in this capacity. And thank you all for watching.